Yeah, now we're finally starting, and I'm happy to have you again. And this time we're going to talk about your book from 2022. You co-authored that work with Professor May. And how did you come to the idea to summarize your knowledge about the administration of the Mongol Empire, and what were the main chapters of your book?
Yeah, good to be with you again. So the book is part of a series actually. So the Mongol World is part of the Routledge World series. There are a number of other titles, actually quite a few. I think when we joined the series, the Tokugawa World was one of the ones that we reviewed. I think the Byzantine World was another one. So we were asked or approached by Routledge to produce a book for the Mongol world. It's intended to be I suppose a companion to the history of the Mongol Empire, a sort of one-stop shop for everything related to the Mongol Empire. In terms of our approach to it, I guess. We divided the book into three main sections, right? So the first section concerns the conquest, state formation, the biography of Genghis Khan, the early Mongol rulers, and the division of the empire. The second section concerns the social history of the Mongol Empire. So it focuses on trade, it focuses on art, it focuses on women in the Mongol Empire, looks at religion, and then finally in the last section we try to put the Mongols in the context of world history. So we look at the way the Mongols were perceived by the people they were conquered. We look at the Mongol diaspora communities. We look at all sorts of stuff. We look at the Mongol legacy around the world, the Mongol legacy in East Asia, the Mongol legacy in the Middle East. We look at the Mongol legacy in Central Asia as well. So those are the three main sections. But yeah, as to what we decided to keep in or what we decided to leave out, obviously everything was. Negotiated between the two of us. I was very lucky that Tim was a great co-author. He's a real pleasure to work with. So we surprisingly enough, it took us several years to produce this, as you would imagine. But we sort of got like a house on fire. We sort of send multiple messages to each other every day, and I think there were several things. I think part of in my thinking, one of I guess the considerations that I have is that I teach, like Tim, I teach a course on the history of the Mongol Empire almost every semester, at least every year. And so thinking about a resource that my students could use to cover all of their assignments, something that would work with my lectures was something important to me, to make sure that there were no gaps. We did also try to make sure that readers that were coming to the topic with perhaps a little bit of background information or little background information would have all of the necessary general points that they would expect to find in a political history of the Mongol Empire, a military history of the Mongol Empire. But we also wanted to make sure that the scholarship was rigorous and that this would be something that interested professionals, people that are working in the field of Mongolian studies. And so achieving that balance was also very important to us. It meant that uh, in many occasions, we were willing to let the authors or the contributors proposed topics to us. In several cases, we went to people and we said, look, we were thinking that you could contribute, let's say, in the second section on the social history of the Mongol Empire, but why don't you tell us, what you think you could contribute? In other cases, we proposed a topic and the author said, well, I can't really do, I'm not really interested in doing that, but what if I do this? Would this work? Allowing the authors to, in some cases, produce original research or to write on a topic that they specialize on, that they've been wanting to publish on, means that we have a nice balance between in a history that will interest newcomers to the field, whilst also perhaps keeping the attention of people that work on this topic for a living. So yeah, there were a few of these considerations that went into making the history. Yeah.
How what was the role of Mongol women in the empire, and how active they were in a political struggle and power struggle between different princes and different clans.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, very active. I guess, of course, women, they're half of the population, so they're bound to be important in all aspects of history. But I guess the question is, Empire. This is one thing that you notice about foreign visitors to the Mongol Empire. They could be Europeans, they could be Chinese, they could be from, from anywhere. When they come to visit the Mongol court, one of the things they invariably remark upon is that the queens, the ladies of the court are everywhere. When envoys come to visit the Khan, their queen is always sitting next to on the throne. There are a sort of when Ibn Battuta is traveling across Eurasia and he visits the Kipchak steppe, the Golden Horde. One of the points that he remarks on is this sort of wonderful Mongolian lady who is walking through the marketplace with a trail of servants and agents and sort of footmen carrying all of her belongings and trying to keep up as she sort of carries out her business. So women are sort of ubiquitous. It's one of the things that is remarked upon as this lack of apparent propriety. This is a sort of a strange thing for people coming from um, sort of sedentary civilizations to see women involved in so many different facets of Mongolian political life in particular. They seem to be out of place in their opinion, and this uh, for some of these visitors seems to confirm that the Mongols are a savage people somehow because their women hold this position. But no, the Mongol women play a huge role in the political history of the Mongol Empire, and there's been some really interesting research done on this lately. A lot of it built on the sort of seminal work of Shirin Bayani, an Iranian scholar who wrote about, I think it was about 50 years ago. She opened a discussion about the role of women in the Mongol Empire and in the Ilkhanate in particular. And I suppose since she published her work in Farsi, it's only been more recently that people, scholars writing in Western languages have caught up with some of her work and have been very, very important, in part because they were able to control property, and royal women in particular were given charge of camps. They were given charge of the royal ordu or the kind of court of the Khan. The Khan typically had four main wives. Each one controlled their own separate camp. And these camps could be very large. They could be thousands of people. They include, ladies in waiting, but they also include, guardsmen. They include secretaries. They include everything that the Khan needs in order to carry out business when he is spending time with his wives. And so, they could number anywhere up to, I think Marco Polo says like 12,000 people are in some of these camps at any one time. So they're very important, but because of the property they control, because of control of these camps. they're also important because of the families they come from. A lot of research into the marriage politics of the Mongol Empire shows that when Chinggis Khan was building his empire, he integrated a lot of people into his empire peacefully. He did so through marriage. People who voluntarily submitted to the Khan had their alliance, their new status in the empire cemented by marrying into the imperial dynasty. And this allowed them to keep control of their people, keep control of their lands, and it afforded them a special status of son-in-law or kurgan. Um, so not only were the wives sort of very powerful in terms of controlling people and property, but their families were also leading figures in the empire. So there is also a kind of residual power that they have through their family connections as well. And this meant that women often had a very influential role in things like determining the succession. Whenever a Khan died, usually their widow would assume the regency on behalf of their children. So they would play a leading role in determining the succession. But they would also serve as advisors. When Möngke Khan sent his brother Hublay to conquer the Ismailis, to conquer the Abbasids. One of the pieces of advice, or perhaps orders, that Möngke gave his brother was to listen to his wife, Dokuz Hatun, to listen to her advice and follow her advice in any policy that he decided to embark on. So women are sort of important in terms of their sort of their role as advisors. They're important political players. And at least in one case, in the Ilkhanate, there is a case of a princess briefly holding the throne in her own right for about a year and a half, albeit that it happens when the empire is collapsing. So she doesn't, in my opinion, she's a political player, but she doesn't manage to hold power for long. But yes, some of these women are tremendously powerful. Perhaps the most famous are the ones the wives that are married to the sons of Chinggis Khan. They are the ones that really wield a huge power. When Chinggis Khan's son Ögedei dies, it's his widow Torgene who assumes the regency, and she rules the empire for about 4.5 years, 5 years. I mean, it's she rules longer than her son does. She sets the wheels in motion to make sure that her son succeeds to the throne. When Guyuk, the third Khan, dies, it is again one of Chinggis Khan's son's wives, Sorhaktani Beke, who is responsible for negotiating or pulling the strings behind the scenes to make sure that her son, Möngke Khan, assumes the throne. They have, as I say, they're very wealthy, very powerful women, so they can buy support where they need to. They can lean on people to make sure that they get what they want. And so, yes, women are sort of very important in the political history of the Mongol Empire.
Who else also dealt with power behind the scene, be, besides women
Mm.
or besides wives of prominent Mongol aristocracy?
Mhm. Yes, yes. Well, I suppose sometimes it's not behind the scenes, right? There's
Yeah, it's very
I
obvious
guess
they
there are
had
some things that are in the book.
political power.
Right, right. I think particularly in my as you know my area of specialization is in West Asia, so I look more into the territory that is sort of the I guess the Islamic world that falls under Mongol control. And there, one of the most prominent historians of the Mongols, Rashid ad-Din, who writes the collected histories, the Jamia Tavarikh, in the beginning of the 14th century. it's interesting. He begins his history of the Mongols with
Yes.
a list of all of the
All right.
important families, all of the important tribes,
Okay, no
right?
problem. How much time do you need?
And
Okay, no problem.
sorry.
I had a phone call. Please continue.
Uh, okay, all right, yes. Yeah, so he begins his history with a discussion of these sort of important, some people would say tribes or families or sort of leading figures in the empire. Um, it's pretty apparent that, one of the reasons that he does this, rather than beginning in the way that the Secret History does, the Secret History begins with Chinggis Khan. This is the story of Chinggis Khan. Um, and then moves into a discussion of his lineage. Rashid ad-Din begins with the story of these prominent families, many of whom are connected to Chinggis Khan by blood ties, but many of them aren't. And it's pretty obvious that one of the reasons that he begins in this way is because some of these people are the leading figures in the Ilkhanate. These are people who command the Mongol armies. They govern provinces on their behalves. They serve in the imperial guard. They watch the Khan as he sleeps, as he dresses, as he eats his meals. And so they're very important figures. One of the chapters that I wrote in this volume is on the Keshik, the Imperial Guard. They're a very, very important group for Chinggis Khan and for his successors. They include the people that he trusts most, his closest companions, the people who are serving him at the time when he's sort of still emerging as a leading figure in the Mongolian plateau. But it is crucial to have people in your household staff that you trust because of their proximity. These are people that serve him his meals, as I said. So you want to make sure that they're not slipping poison into your meals. If they're going to be guarding your bedchamber at night, you want to make sure that they don't decide to come in and stab you in the back when you're sleeping. You need people that you can trust. So the Keshik is important for protecting the Khan's life, but they are also the people who are closest to the Khan, and so they are the people that he appoints to the most sensitive positions in the empire. Um, Now, this is all well and good during the lifetime of Chinggis Khan and some of his successors, but these families remain entrenched at the top of the imperial hierarchy. And Rashid ad-Din's history shows that most of them can trace their lineage through multiple generations from Chinggis Khan's sort of start in life, from the moment that he is crowned ruler of the people in felt-walled tents in 1206 until the reign of Ghazan, which ends in 1304. The same families, in many cases, are still running the empire. And when they don't like a ruler or they feel like a ruler is not fulfilling the mutual obligations that they feel are incumbent on a Khan, to his subjects, then occasionally they will depose him. I think this is one of the things I'm sort of working on at the moment is a discussion of regicide in the Mongol Empire. I think it's one thing that we've perhaps underplayed in our discussion of the history of the Mongol Empire. There are a tremendous number of Khans who are suspected to have been murdered by poison, especially is the most common way, but a lot of them get killed off in suspicious circumstances. Some of them by queens, but in order to get that done, it has to be the household staff. The bodyguard, the people that are closest to him have to be involved in some way. So yeah, these early companions of Chinggis Khan become his household staff, they become his guardsmen, and their descendants go on to become leading figures in the Mongol Empire. Many of them found their own dynasties after the collapse of the Mongol Empire in Central Asia, in Iran, in the Kipchak steppe. They appear all over the place. Probably the most famous of them is, of course, Timur or Tamerlan. His family are of Mongol stock, Turco-Mongolian stock. and they can trace their lineage back to the early companions or the early families that are around Genghis Khan. Yeah.
Which territories of Western Asia the Mongol Empire managed to conquer and keep under their control? Because we know that one of the plans in 13th centuries was to take over Egypt after they successfully overthrew the Caliph in Baghdad in 1250.
Mhm.
But they managed to lose the crucial battle at Ain Jalut to Mamluks, and after that, they abandoned plans to conquer Egypt. They never came that close. They had some
Mm.
campaigns, and they managed to penetrate Syria, ravish Syria in late 13th century, 14th century, 15th century. But the Mongols were never able to threaten Cairo and Egypt after that.
Mm.
Which territories they managed to control
Yeah, that's
continuously in that area in Western Asia?
well, I guess right, right. Well, in the Middle East, I think there are two rivers that we can take as being a rough border between the Mongols and the Mamluk Sultanate. And well, I guess the Mamluk Sultanate on the one hand, but also there are a group of these beyliks that appear in Anatolia and of course the Eastern Roman Empire as well. So one of these rivers is the Euphrates. That is one of the sort of western frontiers of the Mongol Empire. The Mamluks managed to establish several important frontier outposts along the Euphrates River, which make that a kind of natural barrier. The river is not so much a barrier, but the Syrian desert certainly is. And so there is a kind of physical obstacle. There are the fortresses that the Mamluks managed to establish there. But then there are also the Bedouin tribes that control the Syrian desert and the passage through there. The Mongols managed to, and the Mamluks try and cultivate relationships with these Arab leaders to try and make it easier to sort of take control of these border territories. But by and large, the Mamluks are more successful in keeping their loyalty than the Mongols are. So that those are several factors. The other sort of river that is perhaps less significant, but as a rough idea of how far the Mongols get into Anatolia, the Kizil Irmak or the Red River is one of these other rivers that sort of strikes through Anatolia and I guess somewhat marks the western frontier of the early Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, but also is one of the sort of frontier areas of the Mongol Empire. There are several of these beyliks further west that often on owe loyalty to the Mongols, but nevertheless they will
Yeah, I'm
sort of
coming downstairs.
frequently raid into Mongol territory. Beg your
I'm
pardon?
in the houses.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
No, nothing. I'm answering the
Uh-huh.
incoming call. So please continue.
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so anyway, so that's sort of the Western frontier in the Middle East, as to or West Asia. Yeah, in terms of yeah, the question of why the Mongols are not successful in pushing further, I think there are a lot of different factors there. I think the most significant, of course, is that the Mongols after 1260, the Mongols spend more resources, more time, and more manpower fighting amongst each other. When Hulagu arrives in Iran, I estimate that he arrives with an army around 100,000 people, which is supplemented by local troops from the Seljuks, from the Iranian princes who were brought under Mongol control, excuse me,
Yeah, go ahead.
from other sort of subject troops, subject people. So, there's John Mason Smith has also sort of given his own estimate of somewhere around 125,000 soldiers. So it is a large army by the standards of the time. Uh, but after Hulagu's sort of withdrawal from Syria in 1260, this army or any army of this size is very difficult to assemble because the Mongols in Iran need to keep soldiers posted in Khorasan to defend their eastern flank against their cousins in Central Asia. They need to keep another army stationed in the Transcaucasus to protect Iran from invasion from the north, from the Kipchak steppe. The Mongols also keep a third force in place in the area around sort of eastern Anatolia. There is a sort of area around modern day Erzurum and the Jazeera in sort of northern Iraq, the border between sort of Iraq, Turkey. That they have another force stationed there and in Diyarbakir. But it's very, very difficult for them to combine these forces in an attack on the Mamluks. And even when they do manage to seize control of Sham, when they take Damascus or they take Aleppo, they can only hold it for a very short period of time. There's a tremendous elasticity to the population, as I mentioned in our previous
Yeah.
conversation. A lot of the people who can migrate, they move to Egypt, and there are natural barriers or natural protections to Egypt historically, which makes it very, very difficult to move further than Gaza. The Sinai Peninsula is not always easy
Of
to
course.
cross. Um, on the west, you have Libya as well, sort of protecting Egypt, so it has this insulation there. But even without that, Syria or Sham, really, because we're technically including parts of modern day Jordan as well, right?
Of course. Yeah,
In
yeah,
this
yeah.
bigger sort of part of the Mamluk Empire. It is very, very difficult for them to hold and to control. The population, some of the former Ayyubid princes are willing briefly to lend their support to Mongol rule, but they're the ones that are quickly eliminated, and the remaining Ayyubid troops, the Mamluk military governors that are put in place, as sort of they tend to be far more reliable as troops. That's not to say that there are not defections or populations that move back and forth. Towards the end of the Mongol Empire, there is a large contingent of Mamluk generals that migrate to or move across to join the Ilkhans and fight against the Mamluks. They're responsible for creating a new division in the Mongol army, a kind of what I think is a some kind of artillery division or a siege division. One of the technologies that they're said to have brought across is they say that they are naphtha throwers.
Yeah.
They have this kind of, this liquid fire that they manage to propel
Like a
out
Greek
of some
fire
kind of
previously.
projectile. Yeah, yeah, but it's not clear. It seems to be, usually you associate Greek fire with siege warfare and with maritime warfare, right?
Yes.
But these Mamluk soldiers seem to have produced it in a way that it can be used in open conflict as well. It's weird because to my knowledge, there are no Mamluk armies that are using it in the field, but they are given this job or they introduce it to the Ilkhanate, according to an admittedly dubious source. Ibn Dawadari is sort of he has an interesting relationship with the truth, but I also find him to be a very interesting source. But yeah, so there are still soldiers that swap sides. But yeah, the question of why the Mongols can't hang on to Syria or to take control of Syria is a really big question. Some people have said that there's not enough pasture land. I don't find that remotely convincing because the Mongols have been able to control areas that don't have rich pasture land, areas in more tropical climates. They've managed to control large city states. They control oases towns in Central Asia. Um, so I'm not sure that I buy that. It might be part of the answer, but I don't think it's conclusive. I think that Reuven Amitai has done some really good work on this, the question of why the Mongols can't control Syria, and part of it is Sultan Baybars is just so good at building up defenses, which include fortresses, spy networks, but also a sort of very well disciplined garrison army in Syria that make it one of these outposts. There's really only two places um, in the Islamic world that are able to fight really effectively against the Mongols, and the Mamluks in Sham are one of these groups, but the other one is the Sultanate of Delhi, where you also have these sort of Mamluk commanders in charge of things. So I'm not sure if there is a sort of connection there. Both of them are from the same stock. Most of them are soldiers that are or slaves that are sold to princes from Central Asia. Most of them are Kipchaks or Karluks. They know the Mongols, they know how they fight, they know their tactics. So maybe this also plays into it. There's a military historian by the name of Martinez who wrote a sort of interesting piece that suggested that the Mamluks used heavy cavalry, whereas the Mongols used light cavalry. And he suggests that this gave the Mongols a competitive weakness, that in Sham having heavy cavalry is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's The Mongols' mobility wasn't they weren't able to utilize their mobility as well, and the Mamluk cavalry would just smash through them, even when they were outnumbered. So this is sort of an interesting argument that he has. Yeah.
And for the end, I'm going to ask you something about cultural appropriation. We're talking about Mongol relations with
Mhm.
Chinese. We have 3 minutes, so if you need more time, I'm going to send you another link.
Yep. Sure.
What do you think?
Sure.
Shall I send you
I
another
mean,
link, or
yeah,
you can summarize everything in
uh,
3 minutes?
I can have a go at 3 minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, you know what, I think, uh, the Mongols, as I mentioned last time around, they are just like any empire. They look to take advantage of the expertise, the manpower, and the wealth of the places that they conquer. They do that everywhere that they go. They do that in the Middle East. Of course, some of the most famous historians writing propaganda for the Mongols in the Middle East are Muslim Persians. They're sort of from Iraq. They're from Iran. They're sort of from Anatolia. It's the same almost everywhere that the Mongols go, and so naturally it is the case in China. When Chinggis Khan or sort of leads his invasion into northern China to conquer the Jin dynasty. He comes across a sort of population there, the Khitans, who are a sort of minority group that had ruled over northern China previously before the arrival of the Jurchen. And Genghis Khan said, "Well, you must be happy that I've taken over, that I've conquered your new, your rulers and sort of defeated your old enemies." And one of these Khitan officials, a man by the name of Yelu Chutse, says, "No, these people were our rulers, and we're loyal to whoever rules us. Heaven had decided to get rid of the Jurchen, and now they've put you in place, and so we'll continue serving you." Genghis Khan sort of respects the answer. He always respects loyalty wherever he sees it, and so he appoints Yelu Chutse to head up his bureaucracy. Kublai Khan does something very, very similar. When he is appointed to oversee northern China, initially he suffers rebellion, he suffers dissatisfaction because of the way that some of his tax officials are behaving. There is rebellion in Henan province, and he consults with the local population. He consults with local officials, and they provide him local expertise on how to govern the Chinese effectively. And so, to the extent that this is cultural appropriation, I think it's the Mongols tailoring their message to the circumstances. If you consult sources from Tibet, they'll tell you that the Mongols act like Tibetans. If you consult sources from the Middle East, they'll tell you the Mongols are Muslims. And so naturally, if you consult sources from China, they will tell you that the Mongols are Chinese. The truth is that the Mongols are probably always Mongol. They just manage to acclimatize.
Yeah, we were talking about the cultural appropriation, in particular, relations between the Mongol state and the conquered Chinese subjects. Because as time passed by, the Chinese culture became more and more important in lives of Mongol elites. I'm talking about second, third, fourth generation of Mongol rulers and Mongol aristocracy. What do you think about cultural appropriation? Was that some kind of exploitative engagement with China?
I mean,
Yeah, please go ahead.
oh no, well, I mean, I suppose potentially. I think again, so as I was saying before, the Mongols were looking to draw on the expertise of the people that they conquer, and so I think they do find certain things about or certain individuals in China in the places that they conquer that they realize will be useful for them, that are going to be able to help them. In some cases, these are commanders, so. Throughout a lot of the sort of the history of Mongol rule in both North and South China, you have large garrison armies that are not necessarily, majority Mongol. You have a large Han contingent. You have contingents of Jurchens and Khitans. You have Korean soldiers that come or sort of Korean officials that come and help the Mongols govern their empire. In some cases, you have secretaries, of course. You have, by secretaries, I don't just mean people sitting at typewriters. Of course, I mean a literate class of Confucian scholar bureaucrats who come in and help the Mongols maintain control of their territory, to impose a regular form of taxation upon their subjects. This is, of course, tremendously important. And again, the character that I mentioned at the end of the first session, Yelu Chutse, is apparently very important in that transition as well, from being conquerors to being rulers. Yelu Chutse, at least in his funeral stele, is reputed to have played a role in shifting the administration of the Mongols in China from one of military leadership to one of sort of civil leadership. Um, Now, again, how profound that transformation is, I'm sort of quite skeptical. Hublei never really manages to speak Chinese. Perhaps he has sort of a passing familiarity and has sort of basic skills, but never anything to be able to sort of support himself. Um, some of the other later emperors are sort of believed to have had far greater understanding of not only the language, but of the culture of the places that they rule, but not necessarily all of them. The way that the Mongol Empire works in East Asia, there are several centers of power. One of them is the imperial court, which is based out of two main capitals, one in Chengdu in Inner Mongolia and one in Beijing, modern Beijing, but then Dardu on the Yellow River, which is still very, very close to Mongolia. But the other main center of power and influence after the death of Kublai is in the garrison armies situated in Mongolia and in the sort of the area around the Gansu corridor and in East Turkestan. These princes who sort of lead these armies, they receive a good education, that probably the best that money can buy in the Mongol Empire, but they're far from being, sort of ideal Chinese princes. When sort of when many of them come to assume control of the empire, they are criticized for being sort of garrison leaders, of being military men, and not possessing the refinements of a Chinese court. A lot of them hold fiefdoms in what's nowadays Mongolia and spend a large portion of their life there. Again, they're not foolish. They study and they learn about the people that they govern. In many cases, they have Chinese advisors, but the main organs of the Mongol Empire are still governed largely by either the Keshik, the Khan's household, or by Mongols that have, and sort of other sort of foreign groups that have parachuted in to help the Mongols rule. Now, again, I don't want to downplay the role of China or sort of Chinese cultural influence in building an imperial culture. That's very, very important. And the Mongols develop a very strong taste for the finer things in China. In terms of promoting Chinese culture, the Mongols love Chinese paintings. They're great patrons of the art. They love, you don't always understand the language perfectly, then, visual arts are going to be more appealing. Many of the Mongols do have a good grasp of Chinese and have a profound respect for Chinese culture. But again, China is one component. Um, Mongolia, Tibet, and the Korean Peninsula and Manchuria. Also parts of Siberia. And so I think, we can overemphasize the centrality of China in what is going on in East Asia. I think sort of some of the more interesting research is looking at these previously neglected areas, sort of, as I say, in Tibet, Korea, sort of Mongolia, and Siberia, to see what they contribute to the imperial culture. But yes, definitely the Mongols, draw on Chinese imperial statecraft, ideology. They provide, as they do everywhere in their empire, tax-exempt status for Taoists, for Buddhists. In some cases, they provide patronage for they have their own Imperial Academy, which is sort of obviously very important for the production of not just sort of imperial records, but the imperial histories that document Mongol rule in East Asia. So again, it's very very important. But I mean, the Mongols never really become Chinese. Sort of famously, Marco Polo says that Kublai, when he constructs his palace in Dardu, he has grass brought from Mongolia, from the steppe, to make sure that he is always able to tread foot on Mongolian soil, even when he is in the south. Um, his wives live in, or we are told, so they maintain a large park in Dardu, in this southern capital, where they are able to live in these tents and sort of therefore maintain their sort of nomadic culture. So yeah, I think the there is certainly a sort of an appreciation and a sort of recognition of what Chinese civilization has to offer to the empire. But in terms of whether the Mongols ever become Chinese emperors, I probably think to the same extent that they do become Iranians or they become, sort of Turks or anything else. I think it's a complicated. Uh, that is what happens. We can see in some places there is a sort of interesting mixing of the culture in some of the Mongol jurisprudence of China, for example. There are these little signs of where the Mongols have borrowed from earlier traditions, earlier laws, integrating large sections of them to help govern the conquered population. But these laws won't be used to sort of govern the Mongols if they're involved in a dispute or something like that. Um, but at the same time, we know that the Yuan dynasty is uh, sort of their sort of period in power is one of the periods where we see the fewest executions take place out of any Chinese dynasty. The Ming take over and immediately increase the number of criminals being executed. For some bizarre reason, the Mongols seem to be more lenient on the Chinese than the Chinese dynasty. So what do we take from that? That the Mongols have different ideas about how to administer the law. When it comes to marriage, the Mongols insist on enforcing their own marriage customs on the Chinese population. This sort of idea that has been researched very heavily by a historian named Bettine Berge, who has done fabulous work on this topic and has translated an awful lot of the Chinese legal code. But in the Mongol view of marriage, when a wife is married to a husband, she joins his household. That means even after the husband is dead, she's still part of that family. She's still part of her husband's family. That's not the tradition
No,
in pre-Mongol Chinese legal jurisprudence. When the husband dies, the wife goes back and rejoins her family. She takes care of her own parents. This is a huge sticking point, a huge area of controversy in Yuan law, but it's one that many Chinese men are more than happy to take advantage of because it means they don't lose the labor, they don't lose the help that these women bring to their family. So yeah, it's a complicated picture. What I would say is China and Chinese culture are an important contributing ingredient to what becomes Mongolian imperial culture.
thank you so much. If you want to add something, please go ahead. But I think we covered enough topics for this session, and of course, I'm
More
going to.
conversations to come,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'll
I have to keep
yeah,
something for our third conversation.
absolutely. Sounds like a plan.
All the best, and we'll talk very soon. We're going to talk in June.
All right.
All the
Always a
best.
pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye. Mhm.